Okay. Welcome to Critical Rep, a podcast where we explore representation in popular film media using a critical lens. We are two sociologists that want to expand our knowledge of representation in media and want to take you along for the ride. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Kat.
And we are going to bring you a critical analysis of one TV show or movie per week that tackles some serious topics, including race, sex and gender, class and justice, and much more. So join us for a fun and interesting discussion of some popular shows where we delve deep into how and what they represent for those watching. And please note, this is our perspective on representation and not on the brilliant people who work hard to bring us film media. But representation matters in this and all forms of media. Since so many people are exposed to these popular shows and movies, it can make someone feel seen or depict issues that mirror reality or even popularize problematic tropes. Join us as we explore the possibilities and constraints of popular film media. This episode of Critical Rep Podcast, we discuss Please Like Me, right? That's what it's called?
Yeah.
Cool. Here are your hosts, Jenna and Kat.
But I just wanted to have a quick note. We're recording this episode probably like a week or just over a week before it's released, and I just wanted to acknowledge something that's going on in Canada in particular right now with the Indigenous peoples here. So we are white settlers on this land. We currently live in Toronto, and we're on Treaty 13 land here. But recently there has been some heartbreaking and heart-wrenching news with the Mi'kmaq peoples in Nova Scotia, who have been suffering some really brutal and disgusting attacks by white settlers who have not been, faced with any repercussions. The powers that be in Canada, including the government and, public servants like the police and the RCMP, have not responded in protection of the peoples who've been being attacked. So I just wanted to mention that, and I know we both just wanted to send our support to those people. So I do encourage everyone to look into this issue further because it's really important, and there are many, many things happening in Canada right now that we need to be paying attention to and supporting our Indigenous folks about. So
Yeah, Kat and I both definitely 100% stand with the Mi'kmaq people in this and any other land disputes that they may have, or water disputes, I guess, in this case. So if anyone doesn't know what's going on, specifically white settlers and fishermen of corporate fisheries are trying to block the Mi'kmaq fishers from fishing lobster. I don't know if that's the right terminology. Yeah. But so they have literally been lining up boats to prevent access to the waters by the Mi'kmaq people. And recently, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, I just saw that they are also poisoning the lobsters that the Mi'kmaq are catching, and set fire to one of the I'm going to call it a warehouse just because I don't know the...
It's like a processing plant of some kind?
Something along those lines, yeah. Mm-hmm. And spreading lies saying, look at the horrible way that the Mi'kmaq are processing these lobsters. Like, they don't even make it out of the crates alive, but literally that is only happening because the white settler fishermen are poisoning the lobsters. So, yeah. Colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, we are living it still. We're absolutely not in a post-colonial state. Like, this is something I think needs to be in everyone's attention, whether this podcast is about political issues or not. These are lives, and these are people that have been systemically oppressed for hundreds of years at this point.
Yeah, hundreds. Mm-hmm.
So we are responsible as white colonial settlers on this land to provide whatever we can to I don't know, reparations is something that comes to mind. Like, we need to be doing more than what we're doing now, because what we're doing now is just perpetuating systemic oppression.
Yes.
And that's a problem. So
yes. One thing that I would very highly suggest is taking a free online course through Coursera, which is being offered actually through the University of Alberta, called the Indigenous Canada course. We will link that in the description of this episode. It's free. It is maximum an hour and a half a week of your time. It's very interesting. I thought that I was fairly well educated on the history of this land that we are occupying and the way that we have horrendously dealt with the Indigenous peoples of this land. However, I'm still learning a new thing, at least one new thing every week that I take in this course. So we will link that down below. Highly recommend that you look into the Indigenous peoples of the land that you live on. Learn some very basic language. Instead of calling them the Cree, call them the Nahiwak, because that is their name and their language. And those are just like little things that we can try to do as white settlers to dismantle colonialism in our country.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I love that we can sort of use language in this episode too to sort of demonstrate how it's fluid, just like gender and just like all the other things we've talked about before, sexuality. And so yeah, that's a cool sort of way to bring that into you know, what we have talked about before too. So.
Definitely. Oh, I love that I like even forgot the name of the show. So obviously I have not seen this show, so Kat's gonna take over this episode. But first I will do a quick synopsis of the show that is pulled from IMDb, because I know literally nothing about this show, which is the first, I think.
Yeah, I think this is the first one that you haven't seen. I am bad at watching TV, so there's that. The synopsis, or are you good to do it?
No, I can do the synopsis. That's okay. Fine. I just wanted to explain that this is a show that I have for sure not seen. Not even like, I have not even watched a scene of this episode of this show. And I was planning on doing some reading about it before we did this, but life took over and I have not done that either. So without further ado, here is the synopsis that I will also be reading for the first time. So at age 20, Melbourne resident Josh, an awkward but generally kind-hearted young man, comes to the realization that he is gay. Oh, sorry. Following his last girlfriend and true all-around friend Claire breaking up with him on the suspicion of him being gay, exploring this newfound homosexuality is on top of dealing with everything else he is dealing with in his life, which is not helped by his best friend and on-again roommate Tom, a straight but somewhat insecure bloke. That was weird to say it loud. Facing his own issues in commitment with girlfriend after girlfriend, some such as overbearing Neve.
Yeah, it's Neve, I think.
Yeah. Who is, oh, well, we're off to a good start this week, who is around solely for Tom, not wanting to be alone. Other issues in Josh's life largely center around problems with his parents, Alan and Rose, who are divorced, and with Alan having fallen out of love with another woman, a recent Thai immigrant, May. Even without the issue of the breakup, Rose has had to deal with bouts of depression in eventually being diagnosed with bipolar, the lows of her life which have led to her trying to commit suicide, which Josh will do anything to prevent. Okay. I am trying to... Okay, so Josh is the main character.
Yeah.
And his really good friend Rose
is the one who is Rose.
Oh, his mother is Rose. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I added that disclaimer at the beginning of this episode that I know nothing about this show.
So yeah, so I'm not sure if you want to like add this part to before the synopsis. Yeah, so this show, Please Like Me, is situated in Australia, and there's a lot of parallels between Canada and Australia. We're both Commonwealth countries, and we both have governments that basically have tried to eliminate the Indigenous peoples of our land, and ongoing systemic oppression. So yeah, so I think that it sort of does have a little bit of an appropriate thing going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't we get into Please Like Me?
Yes. Go ahead, because I got nothing to add here.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for doing the synopsis. There's a few themes that have come up, or that do come up in this show. So basically, the show revolves around LGBTQ issues, where the main character Josh, like, is broken up with in the first episode by his girlfriend, who is like, "Josh, you're gay." He's like, oh, okay. Like he's just like, I don't know what's going on. And then through the episode he realizes, and it's sort of a comedy and lighthearted way of approaching, you know, the coming out story. And it's just sort of like nonchalant, which is what I appreciate, because it's very, I relate a lot to the main character Josh in many ways.
It's authentic.
Yeah,
Like
it feels authentic. But the other thing is there are also other characters in the show that end up sort of coming out in various ways, and particularly one of Josh's love interests. There's a whole process, and his coming out is like vastly different from Josh's. So it's nice that they sort of demonstrate those things in two very different ways, because they can go in two different ways. Yeah, and so another thing is that's talked about and addressed a lot in the show is mental health issues. And just as sort of a trigger warning, we are going to be talking about some serious things in this episode, including depression, suicide, bipolar, and anxiety. Among other things like issues surrounding abortion, period shaming, hetero relationships, and sort of how they're toxic in some ways. And then we're also going to talk about some of the sort of lighthearted things in the show. Like, for example, each episode has Josh, the main character, like cooking a new dish of food, and it's just sort of like added in as like the intro, but it's very fun. And they get like chickens in their house, and they have backyard chickens, and there's like a whole storyline around that. So it's like a fun thing. So yeah, I guess the first thing that I'll talk about is yeah, so the coming out for Josh was like not really a thing.
Okay.
Sort of casually mentioned it, and it was very relatable to me, because that's sort of how I chose to come out and like not really come out. I just sort of am like, oh
yeah, true.
If you ask, like, sure, I'll tell you, but like I'm not outwardly like making having the conversation intentionally with people necessarily, I guess. So that was really interesting. And so one of his love interests in the show, Arnold, is like someone who suffers from really severe anxiety. And so how they came out, or he came out, was so different, because it like embodied how anxiety really impacts a lot of people that are in the LGBTQ plus community. And he was really worried about his dad. And then it turned out there was a good reason why he was worried about his dad. But I mean, this show is full of spoilers. His dad ends up coming around eventually. So that's good too. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of go through a little bit of the statistics. And the ones that are the most accurate just happen to come from the USA, because they just gather statistics better than Australia and Canada as far as
Mhm.
having them. So yeah, that's just a caveat I wanted to say before actually getting into it. But
Mhm.
so there's an organization called GLAAD with 2 A's, and it's glad.org. And they say that gay men are 6 times more likely to have depression than straight men. LGB youth, which is lesbian, gay, bi youth, are 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. And LGBTQ plus people that keep their sexuality or gender identity hidden have increased risk of psychological distress and are less
Oof, that's
likely
relatable.
to access resources to help. Do you want to
Sorry.
jump in and comment?
Uh, yeah, I mean, God, I didn't come out till I was what, 29? Yeah. And it culminated in a massive mental breakdown for me where I had to take time off of work because I literally could not get out of bed without feeling like I was having a heart attack because my panic attacks were so bad. Because I had finally, after 29 years of keeping this part of myself hidden from myself and the rest of the world, realized that like I was miserable and I needed to come out. So while Kat is like kind of one of those people that's just like, if it comes up, it comes up. I guess no, I was never like that, but I was like very, very internalized. I had very strong internalized homophobia for myself. Because I was one, terrified of how other people were going to take it.
Mm-hmm.
And no, that was pretty much it. I was really worried about the backlash from other people, especially growing up in Calgary, like Kat and I did. It's very conservative there. It's not very LGBTQ friendly. And literally, it took me moving to Toronto, a very open, very accepting, very loving place. We still have our problems in Toronto. I'm not going to say that we're this beautiful, perfect utopia, but it took me moving here and being around the queer community in this city and in the village in Toronto to realize that like it's okay,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And especially I think as being someone that isn't straight or gay,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like I am pansexual, which means that I am attracted to romantically and sexually to people of any and all gender identities and expressions. Uh, it's a lot more complicated because I grew up listening to how, you know, like bisexuals are just confused and they're either straight and experimenting or they're gay and not willing to like come fully out of the closet and things like that. So it was like very difficult. And yeah, when I did eventually come out, everything that I had been repressing for the last 29 years, or I guess however many years it was between 29 and like, you know, puberty when crushes and things start happening. All bubbled up to the surface. It all came out all at one time. And yeah, it was really brutal. It was really, really hard. Luckily, I was not one of those individuals that contemplated suicide. There were definitely days where I was like, I can't do this anymore, just because of like I said, like I could not get out of bed and try to go do, like if I made it to the couch some days, that was a good day. So that was really hard, but luckily I had a really amazing network here of a support system, my beautiful chosen family that I love so much. You all know who you are. Kat is one of them, obviously. It's like keep that repressed for so long. So obviously people that are hiding such a huge part of themselves from the rest of the world, either because they are disgusted by who they are, which is a very real thing, or they're terrified of losing their support system, whether that's friends or family or whoever. There is an intense amount of psychological distress that comes along with keeping such a huge part of yourself hidden.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. That's really personal. I appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone listening does too. I think that it's so true. Like, these are statistics, but there are real stories for each one of the people involved in these sort of statistics that seem to, take the human aspect out of these things.
For sure.
I do want to just I guess, tell a little bit of my story. And I think that
Yes.
part of the reason why I was sort of nonchalant about it was just because, like, I was in a hetero presenting relationship for a long time. And I was in that relationship when I started to realize that I wasn't straight. And so I just sort of talked that through with the one person I thought should know, which was my partner at the time, and kind of just left it at that. And then also just had to face sort of the internalized homophobia, but it was like made more digestible, I think, for me, like, because I was in this hetero presenting relationship and I wasn't questioning that. Like, I still loved the person at the time and whatever. But when I ended up splitting up with that partner, and people, started asking me about dating and all the things that, come up in conversation when you're a single person, I think that's when I sort of had to go through a process of, like, coming out again, both to myself and to all the people around me. And that's when I sort of had to start having these conversations. And for me, it always felt just like a casual thing. Like, I just sort of would start talking about myself, and it felt really organic, because I think at that point it had been so many years that I just sort of felt like it was fine, and I just knew myself, and that's just who I am. So so yeah, I mean, it's not that I didn't have any distress. I certainly did, but I think it just demonstrates that in parallel to the show, like, there are so many different ways to go through the process of coming out, whether it's just internalized distress, or whatever. Internalized homophobia is a real thing, and we all still have it in us, even if we've worked on it. And then there's also, like, the external parts of coming out too. So
yes.
yeah.
If anyone is interested at all in hearing more personal, individual stories about the queer experience, I'm just going to do a little plug. My other podcast called Queerantine. I talk exclusively with other queer people from all different backgrounds, trans people, non-binary people, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, pansexuals, everybody that I could talk into coming on the show. And some of the stories are really heartwarming and some of them are really heart-wrenching. So, like, if you are interested in knowing more about what it's like to be a queer person in our heteronormative society, go and have a listen to Queerantine. I'm on season 2, and then that's it. I'm done because I want to focus on this one. But we'll link a link to
we'll definitely put a link to the Queerantine show. Or it's a podcast, so you can get it wherever you're listening to this. You can definitely just take another little look and click on Queerantine.
Definitely. Yeah
Thank you. No, that's great. I'm glad. And it's so important to really I mean, it's related to this podcast as well, because, you know, it allows us to sort of have representation, and we can hear through both seasons of your podcast, you know, the different representations that there are and the different stories that make up the LGBTQ plus community. So that's really awesome. I'm glad that you thought of that.
Well, and the reason I think that Kat and I wanted to start this podcast specifically was because of the lack of representation of certain groups of people out there. So when I was starting Quarantine as like a fun little side project during COVID hard times, my biggest goal with that podcast specifically was to bring on as many varied voices as possible.
Please Like Me is a very fun show. It's full of like very cute moments to lighten up sort of these very serious topics that they address, including mental health and LGBTQ issues, because it's some serious shit they get into. And I think that the lighthearted moments are really what make the show relatable and grounded. And I just want you to watch it.
And it sounds, from everything that you've been mentioning so far about the show, it sounds like this is a show about queer people for queer people.
Yes, absolutely. So Josh is the main character. He also wrote it about, like, loosely based on his life. Loosely. And directs. So, like, this person is gay. Like, he's a gay man, and he wrote, directed, starred in this show. And it, you know, it got a lot of, it has like a cult following, and I think for good reason. There's only 4 seasons. It's easy to watch. The episodes are short. Right. And like, it's just, it's probably one of my favorite shows ever, which just says a lot because
you don't watch a lot of shows.
I don't watch that much TV or shows. And I've watched this series probably 3 times.
Wow.
Like that, wow. I feel like that should, if folks...
anyone, for anyone that does not know Kat, that is a big fucking deal. That is a big fucking deal. Like, wow. Like, there are literally shows that I've introduced Kat to that she has watched and loved, but has not been able to finish because she's not a TV watcher. So for her to have watched this entire show 4 seasons 3 times is unheard of. I'm still processing.
Yeah, legit. Like, it's, I watched, the only other one that I've watched more than once, well, there's 2. There's Community and Brooklyn Nine-Nine are 2 that I've watched twice over.
Our next 2 episodes.
And I was going to say, we've got some stuff coming in the pipeline with those 2 shows. So that's, that's a little bit of an indication of me as a person.
Yeah. Wow. Still processing that information a little bit. Okay. I think one quick thing, I don't know if we've mentioned this before in previous episodes or not, but when I said a queer show made for queer people or queer characters made for queer people, I'm talking about shows like, obviously, Please Like Me is one. Schitt's Creek is another one. What are some other really good ones that I'm completely freaking blanking on right now? I mean, Shameless, kind of. Like, Ian was very much a queer character made for queer people. Like, there was not really a lot stereotypical about him, which I loved. Versus shows with queer characters aimed at straight people.
Right.
And these shows are examples like Will and Grace or Sex and the City or Modern Family, are like the 3 that are initially jumping into my head. So, you know, if you have seen Will and Grace, past or present, because there's new ones, or Modern Family, and you have also seen like shows like Schitt's Creek or this Please Like Me show that I have not watched, so I can't comment on.
Please watch it, everyone who's listening, and you as well.
I will try. you know the difference between a queer character written for a straight audience versus a queer character written for a queer audience. That night and day.
Yeah.
Like, one feels very authentic, just kind of like casual, like it's not like a big deal, even in shows like Please Like Me, where the whole thing centers around the character being gay.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it still feels authentic in that, like,
Absolutely.
that's not their only personality traits.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what makes it such a good show as well. Like there's just layers to these characters that
Mm-hmm.
that the tropes in these other shows don't get. They're just sort of there for comedy relief usually, or to whatever. Yeah, I mean, typically in those shows, they're like kind of just there for comedy relief and to just, you know, exemplify these like really outlandish, you know, stereotypes basically of the queer community. And that's just what it is.
That being said, I still love Modern Family and I still love Will and Grace.
They're great shows.
Yeah, they're great shows.
But we're talking about representation, and they're not representing the community well in those shows because they're written for straight audiences.
People. Yeah. And I think it's important to note as well that when we are talking about representation in media, we're not talking about exclusively the inclusion of a group of people. Exclusively. We are talking about the way in which those groups of people are represented.
Yeah, and we have talked about like sort of the lack of inclusion of certain groups or whatever, like in a show, but that's because it's topical. Like for example, in our episode last week, I think it was, we talked about like what was missing, or in the Shameless episode too, we talked about what was missing. You know, there was all this great stuff that is demonstrated, but like what's missing? And in this show, it's pretty much any BIPOC person, which is Black, Indigenous, or people of color, because there is one person of color in the show, and it is Josh's dad. So Josh's parents like are divorced in the show, and it's pretty recent, and so there's like this funny thing that where Josh's dad tries to hide that he has a girlfriend from Josh's mother because of her mental health issues, which she suffers from depression, and it later is diagnosed with bipolar. And so it's sort of this funny way that he's trying to hide this person that he's dating, but like it sort of reads as like, because she's Thai and he met her on a plane, so it sort of reads as like, okay, is he hiding her because she's a person of color? And like there's like this sort of underlying thing, which I don't know is intentional, but I kind of picked up on it as far as like, okay, so there's like a problem being indicated, and this character is like a great character. Her name's May, and she comes in with like all this like wonderful advice and sort of sees Josh, the main character, as for who he is, really, more than any of the other characters. And so it's kind of a beautiful character in that sense because there's development, but it's also like kind of problematic that like it's sort of this rich guy that met this Asian woman on a plane because his dad's rich, and it's like a whole kind of cringy moment.
Is it presented in kind of like a I don't know what it would be called in Australia, but in like a she's like fishing for a green card thing? Is it kind of represented that way?
No, not at all. She's just sort of, and then it turns out like she's from a wealthy family too, but like you don't really know that initially, and so it kind of is like this weird thing that's just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way initially, but like once you finish the series, her character develops and stuff, and it's done well. But I like when I was reading a couple articles to prepare for this episode too, like the character or the maker of the show, Josh, who's also the main character, was kind of called on not having any BIPOC people in the show, and he sort of just brushed it off. This was a few years ago. He sort of brushed it off as like, oh, well, I just couldn't find like any BIPOC actors or
Oh,
whatever. And like,
please.
fuck
I'm
no.
so sick. I am so sick of film and TV makers claiming that they just couldn't find fill in the blank actors.
Yes.
No, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
No. Because this happens not only with BIPOC people, but trans women.
Yep.
There are so
Constantly.
many amazing, incredible trans women actresses. And yet, for some reason, we're still casting cis men in trans women roles.
And then they get an Oscar for it.
And then they get an Oscar for it. And like, we can talk about Eddie Redmayne and how he's actually kind of like a really shitty person that I'm just finding out now recently. And he got an Oscar for The Danish Girl. And it's such a problem. There are talented actors and actresses out there from every possible walk of life you could think of. You just need to try harder.
Yes. Say it again.
End of story. End of story.
Yeah. Like, oh
they
my God.
are there if you are willing to find them.
Yes.
And the problem is that these people are not willing to find them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not a matter of they don't exist. It's a matter of you're not looking in the right places.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that
I'm very passionate about this, obviously.
As you should be. I am too. My goodness. And yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh, dang. It sort of put a bit of a like, ooh, moment for me. Like, ew, why do I like this show so much? But at the same time, it is really good. And like, you know, not every show can do everything perfectly, as we've mentioned before.
Of course.
And to sort of just finish that thought is you know, this Josh person has since sort of apologized and has a new show coming out, I think, and has sort of addressed that issue now. So like, yay for growth.
Yes.
Yay for doing it right the next time.
Yes.
But it is definitely a very obvious thing for the show. Like, just it's literally just a white people telling a white story.
And I feel like especially in Australia, like, you're telling me that like there's this entire population of, what did you say, the Aborigines of Australia? Or whatever the proper term is. We apologize because we are Canadian and we don't know. I've never been to Australia. I have no idea. But you cannot tell me that there are no Australian Aborigines actors or actresses.
Exactly.
You cannot tell me that. And like, you live on that land, and it's the same thing in Canada, where like you have Canadian based TV shows, and like I have not once, to my knowledge or recollection, seen an Aboriginal or an indigenous peoples of the land now known as Canada. Like I can't think of anyone that wasn't like put into like a gross trope.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, when here in Canada, when Indigenous folks are employed by, you know, the film industry, yeah, it's usually for roles that are problematic. And you know, folks are typecast, and that's a very well-known thing in Hollywood or like the media industry. Like, people are typecast because that's the role that some person wrote, and you just have to do it, and you're not going to get a job otherwise. So like, that's your job. So that's a problem. I think that there is some innovation happening all around to start to address these issues. But it's not happening fast enough. I think that it's Hollywood in particular, I think, is known for sort of being progressive and having progressive people in it. But for being such a progressive place, there's a lot of problematic stuff still happening, and it's very much still, I would liken it to sort of the old boys club stuff. Like,
oh, for sure.
I wanted to address sort of the mental health stuff a little bit more. I went to another website called thriveworks.com, which is like an online like therapy website. And so it said on there, LGBTQ plus folks are 2.5 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and or substance abuse in their lifetime. Suicide is the leading cause of death for LGBTQ plus youth ages 10 to 24. And suicide attempts are 4 times higher for the same group and 2 times higher for youth questioning their sexuality compared to their heterosexual peers. So this is something that's definitely addressed in the show. The main character, Josh's mother, her name is Rose. Right from the get-go, she's got depression. She has attempted suicide, and Josh is, does everything he can to prevent her from succeeding in that attempt. And so there is a really sort of serious undertone to the show, in the sense that she ends up going to a hospital, and there is all sorts of things that happen there because there's lots of people with various mental health issues introduced as characters. And again, they do it sort of in a way that's addressing these serious issues, but putting a lighthearted spin on it. So it is really well done. And many people probably know Hannah Gatsby from her comedy special, which is on Netflix. I definitely recommend you watch it if you haven't seen it. The first one's called Nanette, but she's in the show, and that's sort of the first encounter I had with that particular actor. And she is wonderful, and her character is great and so relatable and lovely. And I just, it's very much worth watching just for her character. She's like, anyways. But these people all sort of have these mental health issues, and she's a lesbian, and so she's also embodying, a character that's real and has real life issues that have created a circumstance in which she's also admitted into this hospital to get better. And so so I think that that's a really beautiful thing, although difficult to watch sometimes, but I think they did it really, really well. So
Interesting.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not that I can think of right now. I really appreciate that the show shows that connectedness between queerness and mental health issues, because it's so, I can't think of a single queer person that I have ever met that didn't suffer from some sort of mental health distress due to their queerness. Just because of the society that we live in, and possibly the families that they were raised in, and I'm not gonna say anything specific, but like experiences in conversion therapy and things like that, like all of these things in our society lead to people having more likelihood of experiencing some sort of mental health issues. Conversion therapy is just the worst thing.
It's not okay.
It's not okay. Luckily,
one thing I will sort of just mention is I have seen people argue online before that there is a very strong link between LGBTQ plus folks and mental health issues or mental illness. And I have seen people argue online that one causes the other or the other causes one, but this is not something that you can help. And I just I want to reiterate that these mental health issues are because you are someone who is living in a society that does not accept who you are. And so your identity is literally just being oppressed in one way or another, whether you're out or not. There is serious implications for your mental, physical, emotional, whatever health when part of your identity is not accepted. in the broader society. So I just want to be clear about that. Like, this is not something that you can argue the other way.
No, not at all. And I think as sociologists, we understand that correlation does not equal causation.
Yes.
Just because.
Right, exactly. And that's
to higher instances of poverty among queer individuals. That is due to the chances that someone may have been forced into conversion therapy, the loss of family, the loss of friends, the, social exclusion is a huge trigger for mental health issues, especially among adolescent groups.
Yeah.
So it's very important to realize that I don't know where I'm going with it anymore. You can't say that being queer makes someone have a mental illness.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
I mean, you can, but only from taking into account all of the other things.
Exactly. Yeah, like, these are complex issues. If none of the other
problems, if none of the other systemic societal issues existed anymore, queer people would probably have even equal levels of mental health instances with their straight counterparts.
Yeah, but and so that's a great way to sort of clarify, and I appreciate it. But like, at the same time, like, we also like went over some statistics that say like LGBTQ folks are 2.5 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, or substance abuse in their lifetime. So like, these are issues like that the LGBTQ plus community are disproportionately experiencing, and there's a reason for that. I just don't want it to be lost that, or interpreted that it's because they're gay or whatever, or queer, or, you know what I mean? Like, so like, we're talking about this as though it's a problem, because it is.
Because it is a problem. I guess I was trying to say in my very convoluted way was, if we lived in a perfect world where there was no discrimination against the queer community whatsoever, and the levels of poverty and discrimination and everything were equal between queer people and their straight counterparts, the instances of mental health would also likely even out.
That's part of the community's struggle and all of that. And I will just mention there is, like I was saying before, like, there's not very much representation of different races in this show. But Black people, Hispanic, Indigenous, multiracial or mixed, transgender individuals have a higher risk of suicide than white transgender individuals as well, which is just another thing I wanted to add, because we have been talking about race a little bit in this episode.
Yes.
And I do, before we have to end this episode, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of a couple of resources. One is the Trevor Lifeline. We'll include the phone number on the show notes, but their website is thetrevorproject.org. Very useful resource. They're available anytime if you have thoughts of suicide or if you're having any kind of struggles. And there's also one for Canada specifically. It's called thelifelinecanada.ca. So there's also like a particular section, so like /resources/LGBTQ. That will get you to the queer, like, LGBT page specifically, but that is also a suicide hotline. And I think that this show really demonstrates the link between mental health issues and the LGBTQ plus community in a really well done way. And I think that is really beautiful. And I think that is part of why I love the show so much, because it really demonstrates, various characters having different experiences and also being part of that community, but also struggling, because we all kind of struggle in one way or another, whether you're in the LGBTQ plus community or not. We all have struggles, and that part of the show is also very relatable. Like his mother, the main character's mother, Rose, like definitely goes through it, and she's like a straight woman. So like, I just really appreciate the show in that way. And I think that they could have done a couple of things better. They don't really address like social class. They do a little bit, because Josh sort of goes through some money troubles, and they sort of, they go through a little bit of that, but it's not really in a way that's representative.
Right.
So I wish they could have done that a little bit better. And I also just wish they had a better representation of race in the show, because it's not like Australia doesn't have BIPOC people, and there's like one sort of tokenized Thai person in the show, and like although I like her character, like there's definitely aspects of it that have been she's just like a token sort of Asian character. So that I found a little bit problematic, but again, that was addressed, and although it took a while for the creator of the show or the writer of the show to really address that, it now has, so that's been good.
Yeah, that's good. I will also just really, I know we're out of time, but really quickly, I will also just say that if you happen to have stumbled across this podcast and you are in a country or a city that is highly discriminatory against LGBTQ people, and you don't feel safe, there is a organization called the Rainbow Railroad that is specifically to help LGBTQ plus individuals from countries that are highly persecuted, or that countries that highly persecute LGBTQ plus people. They will work with you to try to help to get you here, so that you can at least be in a safe place. Not that would be without its struggles of having to leave your entire life behind. However, that is a resource that exists if you happen to be in one of those countries and have stumbled across this podcast. Definitely look into that, because there's help out there for everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're definitely going to put all of these in the show notes. So you'll have the resources
Definitely
when you're accessing this show. But yes, so thank you for this episode. I think we tackled a lot of subjects, but it was a really interesting conversation. So thank you, Jenna.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Critical Rep. You can find us on all socials at Critical Rep Pod. And that is Critical REPOD with 1 P. So reach us there, or you can email us at criticalreppodcast@gmail.com, which again was only 1 P. Please like and share on whatever platform you prefer. Write us a review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube. The Critical Rep podcast is hosted by Jenna and Kat, two people who want to explore the world of representation in popular film media. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. And until next time, think critical and remember, representation matters. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. So Kat says LGBTQ plus. I prefer using the word queer, but I understand that people don't like the word queer. So if you don't like the word queer, please leave a comment and I will try to change my language if it's really upsetting to anyone that's listening.